it's time for my July wrap-up. We're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of July. I read a total of 5 books, DNF'd 2, sadly, and I have 1 book that I've begun and will kind of just flow into August. Wow, took me a second. Anyway, here's a quick graphic to show you the books that I read this month. All sci-fi, fantasy, I know, big surprise, but that's the kick that I'm on right now, and I'm enjoying it. Overall, I had a pretty good reading month. All my books were either 3 stars or 4 stars, so let me go through these 5 books that I completed, and I'll also talk about the DNFs and the 1 book that's flowing into the next month at the end of the video. The first book that I completed is The Fifth Elephant. You found that what you really wanted was power, and there were much politer ways of getting it. And then you realized that power was a bauble. Any thug had power. The true prize was control, and all control started with the self. The Fifth Elephant is the 5th, I think, book in the City Watch arc in the Discworld series world, and this one is more focused around a mystery and trying to solve it. There's a big emphasis on Vimes trying to follow the clues, though not too many clues, because too many clues is also a problem. Trying to sort through his perspective on good and evil and how that plays into this mystery and his own worldview. We actually got a lot of deepening in our perspective and understanding of Vimes' worldview and how he kind of engages with the world, as well as Sybil and her worldview as well. Her upbringing, what she's been through, how the things that she's been raised to do, and how that affects the way that she engages with the world as well. I feel like my understanding of both of these characters was deepened a lot in this book, as well as their dynamic with each other, and how Vimes and how he can sometimes be a bulldozer, and Sybil and how she understands how to navigate the world of nobles, how these two things can actually, how they work together and are good for each other in many ways. And there are a couple of other characters that are in each book that we got deepening of their character as well. I personally didn't care for the mystery. I didn't find it very engaging or very interesting, and this definitely was one of the Discworld books that was lighter on the humor. Still plenty to laugh about. There were a couple of scenes with Gaspode, as well as a couple of scenes with Death that had me laughing. But it wasn't one of the books where I was laughing on every page like some of the other books are, though I have been promised that the next Discworld book is a winner, so I'm pretty excited, or the next City Watch book is a winner, Night Watch, so I'm pretty excited about that. Overall, it's not my favorite Discworld book, but it was a very solid one, and I had a good time with it. Next is Service Model. He was used to providing very high levels of service, coupled with a very low, albeit non-zero, level of murder. Okay, so this book and the next book were actually in the reading vlog that was last video. And both of these books were perfect for that purpose, because they're both books that I think do well to go in not knowing a ton about them. So in the reading vlog, I go deeper with each of them. So in this wrap up, I'll keep it very light. And if you decide you want to know more before you decide fully if you want to read them or not, you can check out the reading vlog and get some more information. Service Model was a book that I had really mixed feelings on, and it's primarily because I loved the beginning so aggressively, and then I didn't love it by the end, which is so unfortunate. But I loved a lot of the ideas that were in this book. So it starts off with Charles, who is a service robot, and he is serving in a manor that is also run by a bunch of other AI, including the house itself. And Charles, he has his programming, he has his tasks that he's meant to fulfill, and he goes about his day fulfilling his tasks each time. And he has this one master who he serves. And the story begins when Charles happens to have killed his master. Weird little bug, whoopsie, but he's never done it before. He's probably not going to do it again, so surely he can get a new job, right? So the story begins with Charles essentially stuck in this loop of, I have to complete my tasks. You know, the rest of the household needs me, is urging me to continue to try to complete my task, but I can't because, you know, dead. So I'll call the doctor. Okay, the doctor wants to know if he's in distress. No, he's definitely not in distress. He's dead. Okay, now the AI, the robot doctor says, okay, he's not in distress. You're at the bottom of the queue. I'll get to you when I get to you. So now Charles is like, I'm still stuck in this, I'm still stuck because I can't complete my task. So I guess I'm going to dress the corpse. I guess I'm going to try to take the corpse for a mental health drive. And the whole beginning of the book is that Murderbot is one of the comp titles. And the whole beginning of the book is that very lighthearted yet plenty to pull from kind of humor that was so endearing to me. And each part leans heavily on a different author and literary style. Part 1 was based off of an Agatha Christie style, and this is what part one was labeled. And each part you get to kind of decode the label and understand what author you're reading the style of, which is such a fun choice that Tchaikovsky made. But ultimately, by the end, I leaned more disappointed just because that beginning that was light and creative and clever with each part, it had a changing style, and it did continue to go darker and more, I would say, bleak, which I certainly don't have a problem with, but it also became more and more repetitive and dragged out. And I don't know if it's because of the changing style, so the same themes and the same ideas were being explored over and over again, but I really just felt like I was being beat over the head with the themes by the end of the book, and it was just very like overt, here you go reader, here's what we're talking about. In my vlog, I mentioned feeling like the conversation had already been had on page and I was just handed the transcripts to read rather than being invited into the conversation, which just isn't my preference. I think that authors can write what they want, that's just not my preference, and so by the end of the book, I felt pretty exhausted by it. It was longer, more repetitive, and more on the nose than I personally wanted. I loved the beginning and I loved the style of how the parts were done so much that it still kept the rating up for me, but ultimately wasn't the book for me. Next book is The Girl with All the Gifts. And then, like Pandora, opening the great big box of the world and not being afraid, not even caring whether what's inside is good or bad, because it's both. Everything is always both. But you have to open it and find that out. So this one I'm going to be even more vague because this is such a hard book to talk about without spoilers. Again, I do go more in depth in the reading vlog, so you can check that out if you want more information, but I'm going to keep it very, very light here. We start off by following a young girl who is bound to a wheelchair and essentially has no freedom and isn't really treated with any humanity. Her name isn't used. She's called by her number alongside the other children that are in this situation. Most people are not wanting to engage with her in a person-to-person level. It's this very calculated, here's the routine, here's what we're doing, here's the purpose you're serving kind of way. And we're following her very closely as she goes through her day, and in this very dry, this has always been my life, so this is just what it is style. She introduces us to her life, to the one person that she's very attached to in her life, to the aches and pains that she experiences always being bound up like this, but also, you know, my brain's kind of used to it, so it doesn't really register that much anymore, and to the fear when people come in and they're like, okay, I'm going to take a child again, and this is the criteria that I want, so which child should I grab? And then it's like, okay, I'll never see, you know, her perspective is, now I'll never see that other person again. What are they doing? And in the beginning, it's this very close story where we don't really know a lot and we're just slowly being introduced to our surroundings without a lot of information. And the horror at the beginning of this book is this psychological sort of the humanity that's been stripped of these children is the horror. But the book does expand, the types of horror that we explore does expand, and the arc that the character goes on, who she interacts with, what we explore all expands. But in what way? Because of how things are revealed in the book and because of how much time it takes for it to be revealed, I would say that if you are more on the spoiler sensitive side, you would just want to get those answers organically if it was a book that you decided you wanted to read. But if you're not spoiler sensitive and your interest is piqued and you do kind of want to know information, then I would recommend checking out the vlog, because I do have a section of the vlog where I give more information without going into full-on spoilers. For anyone who's interested in more, I would just reference you to that video. Sorry if that's annoying. I'm trying to be mindful of how much information people might want. Ultimately, though, I did really enjoy this book. I thought that it was a really fresh take on what was being done. It did a great job of giving great characterization to the characters that we follow, and drew the reader into this type of story in a way that was different and that was very compelling. I'm still kind of mixed on how I feel about how it ended, which is why it's 4 stars, but other than that, I really enjoyed this book a lot. Next book is an anthology for the Dresden Files called Side Jobs. Harry Dresden, saving the world, one act of random destruction at a time. So this one got 3 stars because I was very mixed on it, which just happens sometimes with anthologies, you know, some short stories you love, some you don't. This did the stories in chronological order, which I think was a disservice, honestly, or at least it could have used some re-editing, because some of these short stories were written very early in Butcher's career when his writing wasn't as strong, and he admits it. You know, he has a little author's note before each short story, and the first story, he's like, yeah, this isn't very good, so enjoy it for what it is. And then the second one, his note was, I forgot that I was supposed to turn this in until the morning it was due at 2 in the morning, so I just typed it up real quick. Have fun. Like, you know, so some of the short stories were like not very good, and Butcher knew it. So I think that they could have at least used a re-edit before they were put in the bind-up. And some of them I thought were a fun romp, but I didn't feel like I needed them in order to continue the series. So for those reasons, it kind of dragged down the overall rating. But even with those things being true, there were still some short stories that I absolutely loved. Like there was one that explored Harry with a particular character that I very much like, and I love their relationship. His name is Thomas. And it was Harry just trying to get a birthday gift to him, and the shenanigans that come, because shenanigans follow Harry everywhere he goes. But it was a character building story, and so I loved it despite it really being unnecessary for me to read to continue on with the series, but it still felt like it served the characters well. Other short stories like The Warrior that follow another character that I love named Michael. And the final story, Aftermath, that was excellent. There were a few really standout stories in this collection that I thought were excellent, and then other ones that I thought were weaker, which is why the rating is more in the middle, because I had kind of a back and forth experience with it. I wasn't over the moon about it, and I'm excited to get on to the standard novels. I had planned on doing a dedicated review for Side Jobs because I just expected to have a lot more to say than I actually do, so I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I'll let you know when I do the TBR video on Tuesday if I've decided if I'm going to do a review for Side Jobs or not, but I'm kind of leaning towards no, and just getting into Ghost Story and continuing reviews with that. The last book that I finished this month is called Shriek and Afterward. This is the sequel to City of Saints and Madmen. We make up stories to understand ourselves and tell ourselves that they are true, when in fact, they only represent an individual impression of one individual fingerprint, no matter how universal we attempt to make them. That quote so well describes why I enjoyed this book so much. This book, as I said, is the sequel to A City of Saints and Madmen, which I reviewed last month, which is a collection of history of a fantasy world, articles and newspaper clippings and fractured information that we have. Tons of things. It's a collection of information on this world. It's an incredibly strange and weird book, and Shriek and Afterward is written by Duncan's sister. She is writing an afterword for one of the books that Duncan wrote in this. But also within this book, she's writing her afterword, but also Duncan is writing footnotes on her afterword as her editor commentator. So it's full of her writings on her childhood and her life, as well as Duncan's childhood and life. Obviously, they're siblings, but also her perspective on Duncan as she watched him navigate life and romance and research and teaching and his notes on all of her notes. So she will talk about their childhood in this sort of a fairy tale, majestic, whimsical, beautiful way, and then Duncan will come in with his notes and say, it wasn't like that. It's not that. It wasn't all of that. Or she'll analyze him, like hyper-analyze him, and he'll come in and say, no, that's an unfair assessment. That's not at all what I was doing at that time. Even the acts of intervention that Duncan did in her own life when she was spiraling and when she was in a really, really dark place, he comes in and gives his perspective on what his intent was. But then there are other times where Duncan is starkly silent, like when she's depicting her experiences in her darkest time. He really doesn't comment a lot at all because that's her story and it's not really his to intervene on or tell or speak on at all. I can't say there's a ton of plot in this book, so there's not a lot that, I mean, I read this throughout the entire month. I started at the beginning of the book, beginning of the month, and it was the final book that I finished this month. I actually finished it today that I'm filming this. And I never was bored and I never didn't want to read it, but because there wasn't a lot that drove the story forward, I felt really comfortable with just kind of picking at it, just picking it up in between other books that I was reading rather than, you know, usually I'm very much a binger. Usually I sit down with a book and I read it unless I'm just super uninterested in it. And for this book, I enjoyed just dipping in and out of it because I just enjoyed it. I just really liked the unique way that it was being told and this brother and sister playing off of each other and playing off of their own perspectives of this world and of these findings and of their habits and their lives. And I just found it cozy, which is the wrong word to describe this series, but I did. I think even with both of these books were 4 stars for me. I have complaints about both of them. I have things that I could kind of say, this is the spots that I was a little bit less invested. But even with these stories that aren't, 5 stars, 6 stars, 7 star, I don't even know how many stars I would give Annihilation, 20,000 of them. But even the books that I'm not obsessed with of his, I still, because of his unique way of telling stories and because of how engrossing I find his world building and the way he says things so uniquely, I'm just fascinated by Vandermeer's writings. So even the books that are not, they don't sweep me away on the level that Annihilation did or on the level that Born did, I still am just like, okay, but I love them. I love Vandermeer's unique way of doing story. So I will be reading book 3 next month. Okay, quickly, I will mention that I have started The Lions of Alrasan. I am not very far into it, but I am very much enjoying it, and that's going to follow into next month. And we have already set a date for our live stream or it's probably not going to be a live stream. It's probably going to be pre-recorded. So I don't need to tell you the date, but I will tell you that we are recording it in the first 2 weeks of August. So our spoiler-filled discussion on this book will be out in August for sure. I'll link it in a community post somewhere when we do it, so you can keep your eyes on my community post if you're interested in that. And I did DNF 2 books, unfortunately, this month. The first book that I DNF'd was The Art of Prophecy. I was pretty excited about this book, but I just couldn't really get invested in anything that was happening. The characters I was following, I couldn't really understand their motivation or why they were making the decisions that they were making, and the more I followed them, the less I seemed to care about what was going on. And since I'm reading less and less and finding less and less time to read lately, I decided I wasn't the reader for it. And then the other book, tragically, that I DNF'd was The Bright Sword, which was one of my most anticipated books, as well as Service Model, which was a bit of a disappointment too. King Arthur retelling. And while I can't say that I'm extremely interested in that particular type of fantasy. I'm also definitely not opposed to it, and the fact that it was Grossman that was writing it had me really excited, because on my Discord, we buddy read all 3 of the Magician's trilogy, and it was this big group of people. Some people loved the trilogy, some people hated it, and regardless of what camp everybody was in, we just had so much discussion. Like, there was so much to talk about in that trilogy, and it was such a fun buddy read. So here I am, leading up to the Bright Swords release, rallying everybody, telling everyone, like, we gotta read it together. This is another, it doesn't matter if you love it, it doesn't matter if you hate it, we're gonna have so much to talk about. And no one was talking. I made it 130 pages into this. There was one person who, at the time of me filming it, that did finish it, and at the time of me filming this video, one person did finish it, one person is halfway through, and a couple of us were, you know, here in the first couple hundred pages. And like, none of us had anything to say. It was just, none of us were really interested in what was happening or had a lot of dialogue to give for it. Which I cannot tell you how sad I am to report that, because I was so hyped for this book and for this buddy read, but I ultimately just put it down because I just wasn't interested in anything that was happening, in any characters on page. I just wasn't interested. It's nearly 700 pages, and I'm not going to push through a 700-page book at this point in my reading life. I want to be picking up books that I love, so super bummed about that one. I will still pick up more Lev Grossman when that time comes, or if a ton of people pick up this book and are hyping it really hard, then I'll give it a second try. But I feel that 130 pages is a reasonable amount of time to spend with a book, and if it hasn't gripped me by then, I gotta move on, sadly. Anyway, those are the books that I finished, DNF'd, and started but haven't finished yet throughout the month of July. If you've read any of these, if you want to read any of these, I'd love to chat with you more about them in the comments. And on Tuesday, I will be back with talking to you about what I plan on reading and filming in the month of August. I'll see you again soon. Bye!